An outright rejection of Donald Trump's plan to relocate Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt. The two countries say that's a red line. But how far can they go in resisting the US president? And what might be the fallout from forcing Palestinians from their land? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Palestinians in Gaza are returning to their homes as a fragile ceasefire continues to hold. But now US President Donald Trump has proposed they should go and permanently resettle in other countries. It's a move opposed by the Palestinians and by Arab states across the region. How likely is it that Trump's idea could become a reality? And what does it mean for Palestinians and their struggle for sovereignty? We'll go to our panel in just a few moments, but first, Fintan Monaghan has this report.
Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza are returning to the north, more than a year after being forced from their homes. For many, there's nothing left to come home to. Israel's war has leveled whole districts and destroyed most of the infrastructure in the Strip. Rebuilding could take years, but for the people of Gaza, it remains their home.
If we had wanted to leave our land, we would have done so a long time ago. The genocidal war they're waging will achieve nothing against the Palestinians. We will remain on our land no matter what happens.
Jordan has its people and Egypt has its people. Our land is Palestine and we will not leave.
But newly elected US President Donald Trump has made a controversial proposal to relocate the people of Gaza elsewhere.
I'd like Egypt to take people, and I'd like Jordan to take people. You're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing.
The idea has been rejected by Egypt and Jordan. They say it's forced displacement, a violation of the rights of Palestinians, and a threat to peace in the region. It's also opposed by the UN and the Arab League.
The linchpin to this peace is that the peace lives up to the aspirations of the people, which would materialise the lawful right of the Palestinian people and sovereign state on their home soil.
We cannot ignore the big threat represented by popular ideas regarding the displacement of Palestinians from their land. These ideas completely disregard the standing truth that the Palestinian cause is not just a population issue or a geographical conflict, but it's a people's cause who are struggling for their legitimate historical rights.
Removing Palestinians from Gaza is a policy that's long been pushed by Israel's far-right politicians, as a prelude to expanding illegal Israeli settlements there. This may be a position shared by the Trump administration. The newly appointed US ambassador to the UN said before her appointment that Israel has a biblical right to the territory. For many Palestinians, this talk recalls memories of 1948, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly displaced in order to form the State of Israel. Palestinians call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. Today, Palestinians once again find themselves in terrible circumstances and face the possibility of history repeating itself. Fintan Monaghan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests. In London, Ontario is Michael Lynk, a human rights lawyer and former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. In Cairo is Hussein Haridy, a former Egyptian assistant foreign minister and diplomat. And in New York is Omar Rahman, a fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and a US foreign policy specialist. A very warm welcome to all of you. Michael, I'll start with you. Palestinians, many Palestinians, including President Mahmoud Abbas, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, have all rejected this idea. And unless Palestinians themselves agreed to it, would this not be forcible displacement or ethnic cleansing?
That's exactly what it would be. Let's keep in mind that under international law, forced displacement is absolutely illegal. It's unlawful under the Geneva Conventions. It would amount to being a crime against humanity under the 1998 Rome Statute that created the International Criminal Court. When that occurred in Bosnia in the 1990s, it was called ethnic cleansing. It would be ethnic cleansing today. And indeed, that's the term that was used by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz the other day in one of its editorials. As well, let's keep in mind, this would be a breach of international diplomacy. In June 2024, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 2735 with respect to demanding an immediate ceasefire. One of the terms that was in the Security Council resolution says, and I quote, that it rejected any attempt at demographic or territorial change in the Gaza Strip, including any actions that reduce the territory of Gaza. So there you have it. It's against law and it's against diplomacy.
But we have seen how Israel regards international law and diplomacy, especially over the past, 15 months during the war on Gaza. Omar, let me come to you with what, the Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has been saying, because he's been welcoming this idea. He said it's an excellent idea and that he's going to work with the Prime Minister, with the cabinet to develop an operational plan to implement as soon as possible. Netanyahu has in the past rejected such notions. Would he support something like this now?
I don't think Netanyahu has rejected this at all. I mean, this seems to underlie the entire war effort in Gaza since October 7th, which is to destroy Gaza, to make it unlivable, and to force the population out. Now, that required Egypt to play a role there, to open its borders, which Egypt refused, just like it's refusing now the statement or the plan, quote unquote, that's come from Donald Trump. Because Egypt sees this as an existential threat, and it also recognizes, the validity of the Palestinians' claims to their homeland, to their rights. And so it's not going to play a part in helping Israel ethnically cleanse it. So Netanyahu is deeply entrenched in this ideology. It's not just the ideology of the far right. They want to see the Palestinians removed from their homeland, and this is their plan. And so I think we're seeing that reflected in the statements of Donald Trump. He's very ignorant of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the history of it, what the Palestinians want, and he's very impressionable. So I don't think these are reflective of his own ideas, but of the people around him who are also parroting what the Israeli right wing is saying.
Hussein, as Omar said, Egypt has rejected this idea completely, categorically rejected any displacement of Palestinians from their land. They said, be it short-term or long-term, and we haven't heard from President Sisi since Trump made this announcement, but this is something he's spoken about in the past, even last year. He said that it could even jeopardize the peace treaty that Egypt signed with Israel in 1979. There's a new administration in the White House since he made those comments that seem to support this forced displacement. But is there any reason to believe that President Sisi's position would have changed?
No, I don't think so. From day one, after October 7th, 2023, President Sisi has always underlined the rejection of Egypt of any forced displacement of the Palestinians, either from the Gaza Strip or from the West Bank. And on many occasions, he explained the Egyptian position. And I guess the statement that was released the day before yesterday by the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, as well as the statement by the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Cairo yesterday, have made the Egyptian position quite clear. As far as the President Trump's remarks, we are not sure whether these were off-the-cuff remarks by the American president, or this would become the official policy of the United States government in the days and the months to come. And going over the remarks as such, we got the impression that maybe President Trump was just sounding the Egyptians, Jordanians. And in his remarks also, let me point out, Madam, that he mentioned Arab nations, not only Egypt and Jordan, but in one of the remarks he said, and Arab nations should take this. Well, this idea is not a novel idea. During last year, some Israeli politicians talked about Islamic countries taking the Palestinians. But the main question here is whether President Trump was trying to impose an Israeli idea on the Arab nations or not.
And he did say, yeah, it is, isn't it? We're often wondering after he makes such statements, were they off the cuff or are they going to be followed by some kinds of policy decisions? He said that he'll have more information after he speaks to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He hopes, he said, that Netanyahu will visit him soon. Michael, we've heard about the Egyptian position. We've also heard from Jordan's foreign ministry soon after those statements were made. The foreign minister, in fact, said Jordan's rejection of displacement is firm and unwavering. I mean, Jordan couldn't make its position more clear, could it?
Not at all. I mean, this for Arab countries in the region is a political hand grenade being thrown into their neighborhood. If President Sisi of Egypt didn't accept Palestinian refugees leaving Gaza in any numbers during the course of the 15-month war, he's certainly not going to accept them now. The same thing is true with respect to Jordan. I've seen speculation in the Western press that both Egypt and Jordan fear destabilization if Palestinian refugees were forced to come into either country in great numbers. I don't accept that. I just think there's a long historical memory in the Arab world with respect to what happened in 1948, with 700,000 refugees not being able to return. In 1967, when a further 300,000 Palestinian refugees were not able to return after that war, that all of them realize that displacement of Palestinians means permanent exile and means the decline of the Palestinian cause. And this is something that, regardless of what Egyptian or Jordanian or Arab leaders would think, the streets in those countries would never accept.
And Omar, besides the fact that it might be destabilizing to have hundreds of thousands of refugees arrive, as Michael is saying, would the public in those countries, how would they look at their governments accepting these refugees? Would they not see it as the government's participating in ethnic cleansing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything Michael said. I mean, there's a historical memory here in the Middle East, which Trump does not have, which understands that forced displacement of Palestinians is a permanent thing, and that those refugees are stuck in those countries, and the countries have to absorb them. And in the past, that has been very destabilizing. It was destabilizing in 48 through the 50s. It was destabilizing after 1967. And many wars have been fought in the region as a result of Israeli policies of displacement of Palestinians. So nobody wants to be a party to that. I think the people across the region project that fully and don't want their governments to be a part of it. And those governments recognize that thing. They don't want to be a party to it, and they don't want to face their own populations. So nobody here is going to just bow to the United States here. Despite the leverage that it has, financial leverage, it is a major aid provider to both the Egyptian and the Jordanian governments. But this is something that they view in much different terms than this kind of transactional relationship. So I don't see them acquiescing so easily.
And Hussein, as Omar mentioned, the US provides an average of around $1.6 billion in military assistance to Egypt since it signed the peace treaty with Israel in 1979. It has enormous leverage with Egypt. Like you said, we don't know if these comments were made off the cuff, if he's going to follow through. But how much of the leverage that the US has with Egypt do you think it would be willing to lose, or how worried would the Egyptian government be right now?
Frankly speaking, when it comes to the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian question, Egypt from 1948 up to now, Egypt, when I say Egypt, not only various governments since 1948, but also the people and the Egyptian army We have invested human resources. We have invested untold hundreds of billions of US dollars in fighting for the Palestinians and for the Egyptian national security. So I don't think today or tomorrow any Egyptian government would acquiesce to any American pressures, even if this pressure would be accompanied by withholding or suspending any kind of assistance that the United States has been providing Egypt in the context of the peace treaty that we signed with Israel back in March 1979. This is an engagement. This is an American responsibility. And I guess that if, and I don't hope so, if the Trump administration would think of pressuring Egypt by withholding the military aid, I don't think that Egypt would succumb to this kind of pressure.
And Michael, given that the Camp David Accords, the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, is such a cornerstone of US foreign policy in the region, it serves US interests in the region. Would this administration be willing to risk that?
Well, I suspect the Israelis are not willing to risk that if the Egyptians made it clear that any attempt to push Palestinians out of Gaza into Egypt would mean the end of the accords from 1978-79. I don't see that being in Egypt's interest. I don't think long-term thinkers in Israel would see that being in Israeli interest either. So that's why I think this musing by Donald Trump, echoing, I think, what the far right is saying in Israel, is not going to go very far. I suspect there'll be other pressure that was going to be put on both Egypt and Jordan by Trump. That may not necessarily mean the displacement of the Palestinians, but I can see where the United States is going to would withhold the kind of reconstruction aid that Gaza would need in order to push his way. Keep in mind that the World Bank and other major international institutions are suggesting it'd be somewhere between $45 and $60 billion to want to rebuild Gaza over the next 15 to 20 years. Where's that money going to come from? And part of it's going to depend upon the diplomacy of the Arab Gulf states and how much they want to be able to challenge Donald Trump with respect to these kinds of plans.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Omar, do you think, would the US pressure risk alienating key allies in the region, Gulf Arab allies, with whom Trump has good relations? There's Saudi Arabia, there's Qatar, Turkey, all of whom support the Palestinian cause.
No, I put a tremendous amount of importance on that relationship heading into Trump's second term. I think Israel and the people Trump has put in his cabinet have a tremendous amount of influence on him, but also his relationships with those leaders in the Gulf are very important and are going to play a very important role in the period ahead in terms of shaping Trump's foreign policy. Because, again, he's ignorant of the region. I think he's ignorant of the history and the issues. And so he's impressionable at the same time. He's listening to those around him, whoever has his ear, and shaping policy accordingly. Those states don't want to see Trump destabilizing the region completely. I mean, this past 15 months has been a worst case scenario, or not quite a worst case scenario. If full war had broken out in the region, that would have been worst case scenario. And those Gulf states were instrumental, I think, in trying to work with the parties to stabilize things and de-escalate the situation. They did what they could. At the same time, Trump, if he's listening to the Israelis, he's listening to these type of plans from the far right and those people around him, those are going to be very difficult pills to swallow if he moves forward for Egypt, for Jordan, and for others. And I think those Gulf states are going to try to prevent this from just, turning the region into a much more difficult or worse situation. So they're worried about Syria, they're worried about Lebanon, they're worried about Palestine, they're worried about Egypt and Jordan, and they're going to do what they can to, I think, steer Trump in the right direction.
Yeah, and I guess so much of this comes down to there's so many people speaking to him. And so who is he listening to? Is he listening to the Israelis and the far right in the coalition? Does he care about this historic normalization agreement that he's been trying to broker between Saudi Arabia and Israel? And would this push for Egypt, Hussein, would the push, for Egypt and Jordan to take in Palestinian refugees, it would certainly complicate those efforts, would it not? But what is it that he cares about most? Because he can't have it all.
We know during the first term of President Trump, he adopted various pro-Israeli decisions that run counter to international law and counter to Security Council resolutions concerning the Golan Heights, concerning Jerusalem, and concerning the settlements in the West Bank. And we are afraid that in his second term he would build on these decisions in the same path, pro-Israeli position all the way. But you have raised an important point, which is his eagerness to expand what's called the Abraham Accords. In other words, to bring in Saudi Arabia in these accords. We know the conditions put forth by Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. Now the question is normalization of Israeli-Saudi relations a priority for President Trump in his second term, or he would be more favorable to the positions taken by the Israeli far right, calling for the annexation of most areas in the West Bank. So it remains to be seen. So far, we cannot speak for sure what will be the Middle Eastern policy of the second term of the Trump administration. Will it be a continuation of the first term, or there will be changes that will take into account
we're only 1 week into this administration, and we know that things can change, not just from week to week, but from day to day. Michael, does the makeup of the administration so far and the people that Trump has put in key positions, the U.S. ambassador his nominee for U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, for instance, rejected the idea that of there ever being a Palestinian state. His defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, has said that Israel should annex the West Bank. What does that tell us about what to expect from this administration?
Donald Trump's instincts are with the right and the far right in Israel, and he's surrounded himself by policy hawks. You've mentioned several: the U.S. Secretary for Defense, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel. Let's name some more. The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations has said that she believes that Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank and doesn't believe in a Palestinian state. The chair of the National Security Council in the same boat as well. The U.S. Secretary of State is deemed to be a policy hawk with respect to Israel. So I suspect we're going to get a largely uniform view of advice going to Donald Trump. They're going to probably embolden his worst instincts. And this is where I think, the Arab world is going to have to rise to the challenge. I think many Arab countries, certainly those who belonged to the Abraham Accords, prove their irrelevance during the course of the 15-month war. They didn't break from the diplomatic relations they had created with Israel during the course of this war, when many were saying this was in fact amounting to genocide. If the Abraham Accords are there in the eyes of those countries that belong to it to protect Palestinian rights, this would have been a moment for them to have said, either this war ends or we withdraw from the Abraham Accords. The war didn't end, and the Abraham Accords have continued. If the thing I think we all should be fearing now is that beyond the possible expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza is the intensification of settlement building in the West Bank. And that's often seen by commentators over the last week as a background agreement between Trump and Netanyahu. If the Abraham Accord members cannot stop these kinds of deals from going forward of dramatically increasing the annual increase in the population of Israeli settlers, then Abraham Accords really look like a fig leaf for the continuation of Israeli domination of the Palestinians.
So, Omar, where to then does all of this leave the Palestinian people? And how worried are you about these plans of sending them to Egypt and Jordan, that they could perhaps not come to fruition, but that we could actually see plans, regardless of the legal challenges that they would face?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I wanted to bring this conversation back away from just the state-to-state politics, back to the people on the ground. Because the scenes we've seen over the past 2 days, remarkable, absolutely remarkable scenes of hundreds of thousands of people returning to the north after Israel just decimated, destroyed all the infrastructure up there as a testament to Palestinian resilience and determination to stay on their land in spite of everything that's happened against them. This is not only a message for the Israelis and for the wider world in terms of what Palestinian intentions are and their determination. But there's a larger context to this. After 1948, Israel also expelled the Palestinian population, destroyed their villages, for the purpose of so that they had nothing to return to. And this is just telling people that we will return, that nothing you can do will prevent the Palestinian people from their goals, from their determinations to stay on their land. And so the issue of return is a major issue. So despite all of what Trump is trying to do, or what the Israelis are trying to do, and what they have done in the Gaza Strip, which is, I mean, beyond anybody's imagination in terms of the catastrophic, the destruction, the genocide, everything else. The Palestinian people are staying there, and they're resilient, and they have a voice here. So nobody's just going to displace them. Who's going to come in and send them to Egypt or send them to Jordan after Israel just bombed the hell out of Gaza for the past 15 months, and those people remained and are alive and are willing to return back to the place that Israel just displaced them from? So that is really the crucial thing. It's not just high politics, negotiations, diplomacy, aid, all that kind of stuff. What do the people on the ground want, and what are they going to do?
Absolutely. The steadfastness of the Palestinian people after so many decades of displacement. I'm afraid we'll run out of time, but I want to thank all of our guests for this important discussion. That is Michael Lynk in London, Ontario, Hussein Haridy in Cairo, and Omar Rahman in New York. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.